Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to Artificial Intelligence Transformed podcast with Ed and myself.
Hi, folks. Welcome back.
I mean, there's nothing in the news to talk about.
It's very quiet, really, isn't it? It's certainly in the week in AI. We were good.
The thing was, Ed, was that people couldn't tweet or whatever it's called, X, it fast enough. You tweet that the person had left the business and he's immediately reinstated.
Yeah, unbelievable. I mean, we were going to talk about identity today, and we'll try that a bit, but I think we've got to spend a few minutes on just that sort of confluence between idealism, tech research, and the reality of multi-billion-dollar businesses. So Friday, we have a business that's valued somewhere between 80 and 150 billion. And on Sunday night, it's valued at what? 9, maybe 12 pounds. We have the CEO and co-founder are booted out. Or rather, the CEO is fired unceremoniously for no particular reason. The chairman, Greg Brockhurst, basically goes, yeah, I'm leaving, and leaves. They appoint the CTO as interim CEO over the weekend.
For 2 days.
2 days. She goes, no, I'm going to leave. The biggest investor in this is, by far, is Microsoft. Microsoft's pumped or promised 10 billion. It hasn't actually spent 10 billion yet, but they promised 10 billion. And they go like, what are you guys doing? But if everybody's leaving, we'll hire all of you. So they create a new artificial intelligence division for Sam and Greg. So you guys can lead it. We'll give you anything you want. And then everybody inside OpenAI, I think the final figure was 95% of them go.
Yeah.
We're leaving unless the board leaves. And by the way, we're leaving on exactly the same conversation with the same share packages and everything and promises to Microsoft, who have just created this business. So the rest of the IT industry goes, hello. So you get competing offers at the same level, or even better, from Salesforce, Pega, Google, because now you've got, say, nearly 1,000 of the best AI scientists in the world suddenly win. So the main instigator for this was the chief scientist of OpenAI, apparently Ilya, who was also one of the co-founders. So on Sunday night, he starts winding this back. Oh, well, it's awful about people, and I only do it for the people, and have a look at the good of AI. So Satya, who's the CEO of Microsoft, goes, we just want to work with OpenAI in whichever configuration it is, which is a beautifully weighted sentence. We'll work with you, whatever, we'll do this. So the board members who haven't started winding back, these 3 others who've never really managed a large business before or done anything particularly significant, I think we would say, outside of some academia, start getting a bit flaky. They say, well, actually, we're going to merge the company with Anthropic, who's one of the competing areas of this, because at this point, they haven't got any staff left. There isn't even enough to keep the servers going. The chat GPT stuff that we all use and all of the APIs would have just turned off. So the moment they said they were going to go with Anthropic, this underpinned this lie or notion, because obviously we all know this was about money. This, at some level, somebody got greedy and just went, what? So the initial acquisition about Sam is he hadn't been completely forthcoming with the board about something. Never said what it was, never said anything, nothing more elucidated. They said that they had a commitment to open AI for the future, this ethical standards. Now, Anthropic, for good or bad, are very closed down. They don't tell you how their models work. They don't tell you. They're kind of the opposite. I'm not saying that Anthropic does anything unethical.
Yep.
Their primary position is, no, this is ours. We ain't telling you how this works. OpenAI is, look, we're going to tell you a bit more. In reality, they don't tell you that much. It's not like we know the inner workings of GPT and tell you how it works in architecture. So this is this going on. We have this massive pile of speculation which starts happening at this point.
It's gone ballistic.
Everybody's gone there. So you've got the sort of hyper optimists on one end, the accelerationists, I think they're called. If we're going to get particularly Soviet about this and start attaching names to people, the accelerationists on one thing is going, these guys must have artificial general intelligence. That's what it is. And this is a battle for the soul of humanity and whatever. And then to sort of emphasize this, the board, having decided that the current CTO isn't good enough, hired the ex-CTO of Twitch on Sunday night to be CEO. So obviously now at this point, the current CTO, who had been pro tem, is now like, screw you guys, I'm off. Anyway, this guy from Twitch is kind of on the other end of it. He's an AI doomer. He reckons AI is a universe, and I quote, a universe-destroying bomb. Now, I think the guy's been reading too much cheap sci-fi, because what we have now is not.
He's been playing games on, or watching people playing games on Twitch.
It could be, but certainly what we have now is not a universe-destroying bomb. And frankly, there's no real pathway between what we have now and a universe-destroying bomb anyway. We've got 8.5 billion relatively intelligent human beings, and we have 1 or 2 stochastic parrots. They're good at doing some things, but they aren't it. So if we kind of play back last week before this started off, there was a lot of debate how close is OpenAI to artificial general intelligence, which is effectively when we can define goals and it goes and does it itself. So at the moment, you have to spoon feed ChatGPT to get anything useful out of it.
Yep.
Prompt engineering is a thing, and we all talk about this. And I'm starting to develop in my own sort of spare time things like prompt ops and LLM ops and stuff like that. That's the coming field to try and get value out of these engines in a productionizing way. Artificial general intelligence, we could just say, go do. So, Mr. AI on my table, manage my day. You wouldn't have to tell it how to do this. It would learn how to research and find things and do it itself. Now, that's a lot more complicated than tell me what the next words are or paint a picture. They're complicated enough and they're fine. But the step between that and this even lower AGI is significant. Now, these AI doomers, like the guy that they hired from Twitch, believe that there's an almost direct self-reinforcing pathway between this simplistic view of AGI and an artificial superintelligence, which is either weakly godlike or strongly godlike. Now, at that point, the sci-fi starts getting a bit over the top. Now, for one reason, there may be an upper limit on intelligence in the universe. Now, the human brain is really very efficient. You're not going to get much more efficient product, and certainly any pathway we have to AGI is nowhere near as efficient as the human mind. And this pathway to artificial superintelligence has certain limitations. One, there isn't enough electricity on Earth to do the computations for a start. And secondly, information has a density, and you can't get particularly dense with information before it starts getting physics problems. You've got quantum tunneling effects, you've got relativistic effects, you have quantum decay, all sorts of interesting things start going wrong as you start making chips more efficient and more powerful. And there's a lot of very hard engineering to do with that. It's not like you instantiate one of these AGIs and suddenly you have a godlike answer. The engineering is complex. Hell, the cooling problem is complex enough. Never mind the actual computation stuff. So this battle comes down to obviously a bunch of guys on the board who claim to be for responsible, open, aligned AI. And somehow the stuff that Sam Altman and the guys were doing, which is basically trying to make AI do something useful and basically integrating it with Microsoft's business stack. Now, the big win from this is Microsoft, no matter how it wins. Microsoft has won. This particular flavor of AI is Microsoft. They've now got effectively that. The board will now be reshaped because it appears that Sam Altman is now going back to OpenAI.
Yeah, there's an announcement on X. Yeah,
and that means the existing board, who had some concerns about Microsoft, if we ignore the sci-fi, they potentially had some very reasonable concerns about the Microsoft deal. Microsoft have got a lot of money and a lot of power. Do they want to do that? Does it help us? They've gone. That's ended. That now the new board that will be going in is a much more commercially minded board, rather than potentially a high-minded or unrealistic or sort of potentially naive board. And that means the new board will be pushing very hard in. I would suspect what we'll see is either an acquisition by Microsoft to secure this API, or actually something more interesting, because this does expose the ultimate flaw at the base of this. OpenAI doesn't have a moat. This isn't some hyper-protected piece of stuff. This is AI. We know how to do it now. We know enough about this. And from what's leaked out about OpenAI's structure behind GPT, it's kind of kludgy. It's kind of operator on operator on operator on operator. It's kind of let's throw lots of stuff in. And the balance of power between the efficiency of the operator and the filters they now have to put into it to stop it offending people and becoming racist and whatever, or making porn, is now becoming quite thick. There's a significant body of anecdotal data that says that the work they're putting into the filter thing is actually starting to degrade the core functionality. And there are some respects in that. I've noticed a limited data I have on this one, but say over a couple of hundred runs over the last month, performing the same task, which is effectively diagrams as code creating mermaid script, it doesn't seem to be quite as responsive as it used to be. And the quality appears to be But there isn't quite enough data on that. But certainly some strong anecdotal stuff that the architecture itself has some significant challenges. And that makes it very interesting when you say the UK government today pumps $500 million extra into IT funding, essentially to stand up a couple more supercomputer and innovation nodes near big universities. I expect Reading will probably get one. I think there's one in Bristol, one in Edinburgh. We'll stick some elsewhere. These are a sign that, to be honest, OpenAI has first mover advantage, but it doesn't have the only advantage. This isn't the only game in town. You can build these things fairly rapidly. In the end, the mathematical engineering function underpinning it is quite well known. And certainly the way that NVIDIA is ramping up production of their A100 chipset, which are the sort of super GPUs used for AI, they shipped, I don't know, a couple 100,000 this year. They reckon they can ship 20 million by the end of 2026. This is a vast computing wave that's coming through that's going to enable some huge uses of this, which actually starts pinning us onto the second half of our conversation, which is what we weren't going to talk about, which is identity. Now, there's a series of articles starting to come through about, in the sort of smallest use case, how do we do identity verification in a world where everything can be faked fairly effectively? So one of the ways we do now on sort of you're opening a new bank account, there's all this know your customer type stuff. How do I know that Tim is Tim? How do you know that Ed is Ed? So we rely on identity documents, we rely on documentation, we rely on XYZ. All of those are significantly imperiled. Now, there was a series of things that they've implemented filters that you can't get ChatGPT to make a passport. And there's a lot of people trying to hack around that, and with various degrees of success. But there has been some stuff that's come out that people have built on some fairly open source stuff that's very efficient at making a false passport. Now, people are going to go, oh, of course, but you've got to be able to verify against the number and you phone up a government service, etc. It doesn't matter, because actually there are still weaknesses in the entry points to these. You can create entire false identities, which, to be honest, is mostly a balance of probability. You can create birth certificates, you can create register registers. So there is now this worrying thing that we've got, and there was an article we included about inside big data, which talks about the need for now, how do we do more complex identity verification? So in the UK, the government has now implemented this thing that it takes a photograph of you on your screen, but it changes the light all the time from effectively your camera, so that it's designed to say that this isn't an AI image. This is actually a real image, because you hold your phone up in front of your face, it changes the color of the screen, and that shows different colors on your face, and it can show that it's a real person. Now, almost immediately, a new form of facial change filter has come out. Now, previously, what they do is they'd kind of wrap a mask around your face. It was kind of like a grid mask, depending how it was, measuring cardinal points and doing all sorts of stuff. But that was effectively a mask, because that you'd see where people use these filters, and if they move the head rapidly, the face stayed for a second. The latest filters completely remap the face on a pixel by pixel level, which essentially defeats this new government way of doing it. You could put a filter in the camera device that you're taking the photo with that would overlay you, and that's in real time, which now poses some significant challenges to one of the government's pathways for identity verification. The second thing is we've got this quite strong reliance on documents. Whenever the primary pathway falls, so I can't get a passport online, you have to go set up an appointment where they can go look at you. Now, that's actually now because these documents can be created with a great degree of fidelity, and most people have this. That how do you create that? Now, the weakness point for this is it's not for people who have long established identities. For me and you, it doesn't matter. We've got British identities. But if you've got somebody who's, say, a migrant or a refugee, those identities are much harder to verify, and they rely on some pretty shonky stuff to identify. It's much more of an art than a science. And that's now seen as a worry that these people could effectively generate entire past histories for themselves. And that means they could obfuscate age, they could obfuscate intent. I mean, genuine refugees, potentially people that want to harm us. I'm not talking about sort of illegal refugees and illegal immigrants and people who just want economic. They tend to want to get in. But the people that might invest in this might be criminals trying to hide their identities, or potentially terrorists. And that's seen as an area that there's been a lot of investment in. I know the Department for Homeland Security, as well as the Home Office in the UK, have set up task groups to start work on how do we re-identify people. And this obviously then plays into banking, because obviously banking's got the whole money laundering stuff, and particularly in two areas where they're trying to track down that sort of small corporate area. who's the beneficial owner of this company? And that sometimes, again, can rely on some pretty shonky stuff. And a lot of work's been done trying to digitize these processes. So an identity verification or a note that I own 50% of an organization written on the back of a cigarette packet, somehow scanned and then blade into it, is an area where these things can be faked as well. And sometimes they rely on a more of a halo effect to verify these things. And AIs make that quite easy to fake. And I think that's a fairly well understood use case. But then there were two other areas of identity which we thought would be quite interesting to talk about. One is it's a worry about sort of brand identity. At the moment, brand experiences online are relatively distinct because they're designed by a human. A human being designs them, and if I go to Marks and Spencer's, my online flow is this. The latest thing with generative AI, of course, is, well, I don't want my flow today to be the same as yesterday. I want to be responsive to what I'm doing now. The problem is that the underpinning platforms are now all going to be the same. You're all going to be sticking on top of some form of AI. Doesn't really matter which tower it is. So there's now a worry that you're going to get quite homogenized experiences because the AIs, whilst they are generating in real time exactly what you want to be doing, they tend to follow a statistically predictable pathway. And that statistically predictable pathway is pretty similar to every company's. So instead of there being this potential for wilder innovation, you actually get the opposite. What's going to happen is that these services smudge together because they're just now kind of a stuff. You go to a new, very intelligent chatbot, say in your retail bank, and the current chatbots are kind of like a decision tree. They kind of go, what do you want to do? All right, there's the front plate to this process. The next generation of chatbots are going to take that a lot further. They're actually going to be able to execute what you want to do. Hi, Mr. Bank, I'd like a new bank account. There you go, Ed. Instead of it making me fill it all in, the chatbot can do that. Now, everybody's saying that the hope of this is that we can get hyper-personalized experiences and everything will be absolutely brilliant. And that may mean that I get exactly what I want. But how does the bank differentiate itself now? Now, at the moment, banking is an area that's dominated by, on one half, relatively rational decision-making. Certainly about things like mortgages and loans and credit cards. People are pretty rational about those. They go, look at these numbers. This one's higher, this one's lower. This one's got good services, this one's got bad. But then about some core banking products, they're remarkably, not quite irrational, they're remarkably loyal. People don't change bank accounts very often, even though it's really easy. People don't. They stay with the bank, even if it's not particularly good. Corporate banking, where it's actually genuinely quite a pain in the bum to change stuff, is actually people don't. I mean, you can be, well, I'm with Standard Chartered, I'm with HSBC, I'm with Citibank for 30, 40 years. It's a big thing to change, and it's seen as a massive win by these banks. And they differentiate on service and location and ability to do that. But if you're now being able to, any bank can generate this stuff, paradoxically, does this actually undermine their core areas of loyalty? How does the bank establish its identity when its chatbot is now just the same as anybody else's chatbot? It's now kind of like the analogy I was using with a client this week was it's a bit like the Dreadnought race. The day before the Dreadnought was launched, Britain had twice as many battleships as everybody else. The day after the Dreadnought launched, we were only up by one because everything else was wiped out. It actually means that areas where certain banks, I use banking because it's an area that's very hot for them, but all sort of organizations like this, they have clear blue water to many of these banks. If we look at the global leader, which I believe is JP Morgan in this space, JP Morgan Chase, they're seen as the most customer experience. They've launched in the UK as Chase, etc. That massive lead they have now could be undermined by this, because if everybody can just implement this sort of experiential AI, then how far is the lead? And it means that you're going to see some very interesting innovation as people try to impose a brand identity onto a statistical process. Now, I think that's something interesting, something we can come back to. But I think the final one I'd like to think about is sort of an identity of people and countries. Now, people tend to believe in a narrative of themselves, and people tend to think they make their own mind up. And I think studies have shown that whilst Generation Z has got more nous with online messaging than perhaps Generation X and the boomers have, people are still influenced. You tell somebody something 10 to 20 times, they tend to believe it. If they just constantly hear it by repetition, it forms pathways in the mind. Those pathways have more weight. And if the mind is a statistical model, those more weighty pathways get approved. It's like how propaganda works. It's how halo effect works. it's very easy for us to generate almost personalized echo chambers with AI. You can see that in certain of the areas. There's obviously some very crude botnets and things like Twitter, on things like on X, things like on Instagram, things like on TikTok. They're strongly focusing you to certain pathways of experiential, and they're done for good or bad purposes. The good purpose, I would say, is just for commercial means. Bad purposes are maybe they're trying to make you do stuff. On stuff like Reddit, there is now relatively complex areas where they're outrage engines and effectively trying to measure how much heart rate you can make you go up by pumping this in. And it's an interesting area they're going to be working on. What does this do to human identity when every piece of content you read or experience has been generated not just as a record or even as an honest opinion, but as somehow reflective to you? Everything is going to auto-generate. And I think there's some interesting philosophical things that are coming out. I know some of the universities have been looking at this sort of ego death concept of how does almost perfect experiential match, what does that do to the human mind? And the second one is also some interesting stuff that was coming out of the Wikipedia Foundation, of some pattern matching they've seen on editing of relatively minor articles that are quite deep in various sort of consciousnesses. I don't know, Ethelred the Unready or something like the Emperor Caligula. There have been patterns of editing made across this that have obviously been done by AIs. And AIs that are editing at that level can actually be steered to do some relatively profound change, fairly deep in historical fact. You could start theoretically to change the mind of a country by underpinning its core tenets and seeing what they did. And I think that's going to be a fascinating area for us to explore in later things as well. But I think we're out of time at the moment.
We are out of time, Ed. I thought I'd let you carry on until the end because it's always fascinating. Yes, I think that TikTok, for example, is used in certain countries. Actually, the algorithm is used as a way of presenting certain content to people that they need to behave in a certain way.
Absolutely. And this again is only going to get more because AIs do make that sort of adaptation fairly easy. Anyway, folks, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ed, for your insight. We've got 2 more to go before the holiday season, but thank you.
Thank you very much. See you all again soon. Take care.
And yes, see you again. Thanks.